What do you usually do on December 24th? Yes, today I'm starting with this question, and you might say, what? But it's May. Are you already thinking about Christmas? No, I'll explain the reason later. But usually, on December 24th, people spend Christmas Eve celebrating, toasting with friends and coworkers. There are those who rush around doing last-minute Christmas shopping. Maybe they've forgotten a gift to put under the tree or need something for the Christmas Eve dinner. But there's someone who's forced to work at 7 in the morning, even though it's Christmas Eve. It's December 24th, 1992, when a group of carabinieri go to the home of an official, a CISDE official, a super cop, as he's described. That group of carabinieri has an arrest warrant signed by Palermo's chief prosecutor, Giancarlo Caselli. There's something very serious written in that arrest warrant. External participation in a mafia-type association. Article 416 bis of the Italian Penal Code. And that charge is brought against a very high-ranking official. His name is Bruno Contrada. Until that morning, Bruno Contrada is one of the most prominent figures within the state police and the intelligence services of our republic. But from that morning, from that Christmas Eve in 1992, that public image crumbles and reveals something else. Something that for too long had remained both said and unsaid, whispered under one's breath in the corridors of the Palermo courthouse. Bruno Contrada, Uduturi, was said to be a traitor to the state. And for this, his arrest is ordered and later he is sent to trial. Today we talk about him, about Bruno Contrada, about all his contradictions, about this figure who went down in history. He died a couple of months ago for what he was, but even more so for what he did or could have done or was accused of having done. Bruno Contrada is an extremely complex figure. Bruno Contrada was born in Naples on September 2nd, 1931, in a context initially marked by dictatorship, then by the Second World War, and finally by Reconstruction. After finishing high school, he began his career within the law enforcement agencies, joining the Public Security Corps, which would later become the State Police in 1958. From the very first years of his career, he demonstrated investigative skills and a particular dedication to fighting organized crime. His career developed mainly in Sicily, particularly in Palermo, the capital of the region. And it is here in Palermo that in 1973, Bruno Contrada was appointed head of the Criminal Investigation Squad. It is a strategic position in the fight against organized crime during a period, in the 1970s, when Palermo began to be shaken by the first high-profile murders. His deputy at that time was Commissioner Boris Giuliano, whom we have already talked about. Boris Giuliano is considered within the police environment to be an exceptional person, serious, well-prepared also for this reason. Besides the fact that he refused to bow to mafia logic, he was killed in a bar in Palermo, shot in the back while drinking coffee. We discussed him in another video available on the channel. However, there is a difference between Boris Giuliano and Bruno Contrada. In that period, when Cosa Nostra was reorganizing itself, after the First Mafia War, in which the big bosses were sent to prisons in northern Italy, in which the clans are looking for new alliances in the territory. There are upright, respectful police officers, absolute servants of the state, like Boris Giuliano, and there are others who tend to serve another master, Cosa Nostra. In that period, while Contrada develops an investigative intelligence network, trying to closely monitor mafia activities, also collaborating with the judicial authorities. Inside the clans themselves, people start to whisper something. It's Tommaso Buscetta, the boss of Two Worlds. We also dedicated a video to him that you can find on the channel, which reveals him to the investigators several years later. Rosario Riccobono, one of the bosses of Cosa Nostra, reveals this unconfessable secret to him in 1979. Riccobono tells Tommaso Buscetta that there is no danger in his own territory, in the territory of his mafia family, that he can hide there safely, because the police will never come looking for him. And faced with Buscetta's hesitation, Riccobono adds, "I have Dr. Contrada in my pocket, and I can get all his information. Uditore, that's what Bruno Contrada is called at Palermo Police Headquarters. At that time, he is a rising official. After the violent death of Boris Giuliano, it's up to him to lead the Criminal Investigations Unit. But not only that. In 1983, he also receives the appointment from SISDE, the Service for Information and Democratic Security, the Civilian Intelligence Service. And this is where Bruno Contrada becomes the super cop, the man with increasingly important responsibilities. He even becomes the number 3 at SISDE, with a role coordinating anti-mafia and anti-terrorism efforts. He handles extremely sensitive files, coordinates complex operations, and serves as a liaison with many branches of the state. He would seem to be the right person in the right place, but at the Palermo prosecutor's office, the whispers continue. They tell a different story. They say, for example, that the anti-mafia pool does not like to collaborate with Bruno Contrada or to openly share information with him. Uditore is the subject of constant gossip. When he enters certain rooms where the pool works, everything goes cold and silent precisely because no one trusts him. But is it excessive caution shown by the magistrates who are working against Cosa Nostra? Or is there something more? That something more shows itself years later, after the death of Giovanni Falcone, after the death of Borsellino. We have to get to that December 24th, 1992. The mafia bombs have already exploded, other figures have already been killed, and as the new head of the prosecutor's office, there's Giancarlo Caselli, the man who came from Turin, where he helped defeat the terrorism of the Red Brigades. Caselli gathered the information provided by several cooperating witnesses. There's Buscetta, but he's not the only one. There's also Gaspare Mutolo, Giuseppe Marchesi, Salvatore Canciami. They all agree on one point. Bruno Contrada is not that servant of the state, so upright and so dutiful that people think he might be. He is something else. He is indeed a point of contact, but between the state and Cosa Nostra. It's a serious accusation, one might say damning, but it's an accusation that holds up in the face of the various cross-checks presented by Caselli and the other magistrates, with the findings of the investigations and with the various testimonies that are given separately. And therefore it's impossible for them to influence each other. Bruno Contrada, then, is a traitor, a man who sold out the state to Cosa Nostra, or at least sold out people who worked for the state to Cosa Nostra. That external complicity in mafia-type associations, a new crime that had been introduced with Article 416 bis of the Penal Code. That very article had made it possible to open up a new world. The article, and especially external complicity, had been introduced in the 1980s to fill what was a gap in anti-mafia legislation. The investigations by the Palermo pool had led to the so-called white-collar figures, to prominent figures in civil society, external to Cosa Nostra because they were not affiliated, not initiated, as they say, but they did business and had mutual interests, just like Mama Santissima. That article, 416 bis of the Penal Code, punishes those who favor the mafia organization even without being a member and requires specific intent and a continuous contribution. External participation in a mafia association is the tool adopted by magistrates to reach a new level, the level of the untouchables, in the fight against organized crime. It's something new, but in the case of Contrada, it's something that shakes the very foundations of the state. Bruno Contrada represents a case of international significance. It had never happened before that a servant of the state, a super cop, was accused of collusion with the bosses. But then why? Why would Bruno Contrada have betrayed? What interest did Bruno Contrada have in selling out his colleagues, magistrates, or other members of the state to Cosa Nostra? This is exactly what divides Italian public opinion in two, and not just ordinary people, even within the state itself. The then chief of police, Vincenzo Parisi, defended him. He defends Contrada, saying that it's not possible that the accusations are self-serving and that it's an attempt by some former mafiosi to take revenge for what Contrada had done to fight Cosa Nostra. But there are other servants of the state such as the former head of the investigative office in Palermo, Antonino Caponetto, the man who had structured the first anti-mafia pool together with Giovanni Falcone, who considers Parisi's position to be reckless. Caponetto doesn't go out on a limb, but he makes it clear that those rumors within the prosecutor's office must have had some basis. For a long time, there was much discussion about both the statements of the informants and Contrada's position. One of these informants, Gaspare Mutolo, offers a new perspective on the whole issue. He says that the pact forged over time between Cosa Nostra and some political parties, especially Christian democracy, was driven by political expediency and self-interest. A pact to prevent the rise of communism from Portella della Ginestra onward, what had been defined as the Pax Mafiosa. It was an exchange of favors, votes for the Christian democracy to keep itself as the leading party in return for favors toward the bosses. But something had changed in the second half of the 1970s, and from that moment when things started moving differently, investigations started, for example, into the collapsed empire of Michele Sindona, an empire in which the mafia invested a lot of money. This mafia piece disappears, dissolves, and in its place a new war begins. First, an internal war within Cosa Nostra, the second great mafia war, and then against the state. The cooperating witnesses also talk about Boris Giuliano, about the fact that he was incorruptible, that he couldn't be bought. According to these cooperating witnesses, on the contrary, Bruno Contrada had shown himself to be available, open to dialogue, to talk, to collaborate, according to Mutolo, but also according to other cooperating witnesses. Contrada was available. He had spoken, obviously, with Riccobono, with Stefano Bontate, the Prince of Villa Grazia. The boss of the losing mafia had made himself available to return the documents, including driver's licenses to some bosses. No small matter. Bruno Contrada was a fellow member within the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, an equestrian order, a Catholic chivalric order of Count Arturo Cassina, who was a very good friend of Bontate. This shared membership, this closeness between Contrada and Cassina would have favored, and these are filed court documents, this constant proximity between the super cop and the circles of Cosa Nostra. From that moment on, we see a new Bruno Contrada, the traitor Contrada, who goes on trial. He has several ongoing proceedings. The first trial began in 1994 and ended 2 years later on April 5, 1996, with a conviction. The public prosecutor requests 12 years in prison. In the end, the sentence is 10 years. Contrada and his lawyers file an appeal in the Court of Appeals, which in 2001 acquits Contrada of all charges. But there is another appeal filed with the Court of Cassation, which decides to have the trial repeated in the Court of Appeals. We arrive at 2006. The Court of Appeals overturns the acquittal and upholds the 10-year sentence. The final appeal to the Court of Cassation in 2007 confirms the conviction. In 2012, now elderly and also ill, Bruno Contrada is released from prison. But in the meantime, his lawyers file another appeal, this time to the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, which rules in 2015. The ECHR states that there was a violation of the principle of legality. The last ruling was in 2017 when the Court of Cassation declared the sentence unenforceable and annulled the criminal effects. Bruno Contrada passed away last March 12 at the age of 94. But what did he leave behind? Some observers believe that Bruno Contrada is the symbol, or rather the ultimate victim, of a huge judicial abuse. Others, on the other hand, consider him the absolute symbol of something else, of that gray area where parts of the state and Cosa Nostra meet and agree on something. His case has raised some key issues: the foreseeability of the crime according to the principle of legality, the very delicate balance between public order and individual rights, and the role played by certain branches of the state. The fight against Cosa Nostra, something that would also have been attributed to other servants of the state, and finally the relationship between Italian justice and supranational bodies, such as the ECHR. Bruno Contrada spent his last years as a free man in Palermo, continuing to declare his innocence and to share his experience, even through a book. This autobiography of his, along with the interviews he gave, are a legacy as well as an attempt to clarify his own situation, leaving a sort of historical testimony. But the story of Bruno Contrada has left behind very serious repercussions. First of all, there is the need to clarify the extremely difficult boundaries of the so-called external complicity, how much a public official can really be aware of what he is doing against the state and in favor of a criminal network, and how much he is doing it with full awareness. Then there's the relationship between the police, intelligence services, and the judiciary, a relationship that is not always easy. In fact, it's complex, with jealousy, with mutual suspicion, sometimes with refusal, more or less open to cooperate due to information leaks or negative incidents in the past. And then there's the debate about the principle of legality in criminal law and individual rights. So who really was Bruno Contrada? Was he a servant of the state? Yes. Was he a super cop? Certainly. Number 3 at S I's is D. He was a controversial figure, that's for sure. Did he have connections with Cosa Nostra according to the trial findings? Yes. Did he work to benefit Cosa Nostra? According to the verdicts, this conduct did take place, even though later on they preferred to erase everything. Was Bruno Contrada a victim of a miscarriage of justice? Or was there something real? Or should his actions today be interpreted in several ways, both as a policeman trying to investigate and as a policeman seeking an agreement? For several reasons, maybe sometimes to save colleagues or to influence a power struggle within Cosa Nostra. Was Bruno Contrada a man, a policeman serving justice, or did he use his position for other purposes? I leave these questions to you. Try to find your own answer to all this. If you want, you can write it in the comments or you can email me what you think. I still have my doubts, a heavy doubt that has crept into my mind since that Christmas Eve morning in 1992 and still hasn't gone away. And to think that so many years have passed. But I think I'm not the only one in this country who has doubted Bruno Contrada. Because when certain facts, certain circumstances, certain statements, testimonies come to light, it's hard to think that it's all the result of some diabolical plot or someone's envy. It's extremely difficult. And that doubt always remains there, nagging at us, prodding us, until the moment comes when we really, really want to know more. And maybe we would really like for once to know the whole truth. Nothing but the truth.